For many, many centuries of human history, there seems to have been very little thought about the subject of freedom, equality. The world lived under systems of government and rule, of individuals and groups, and the masses were always, to some extent, slaves, peasants. The Hebrews dreamed of being free from Pharaoh, but probably not with any true sense of freedom, because it is doubtful if they even visualized what it would be to really be free. They knew what it would be free, what it would be like to be free of the Pharaoh form of slavery, but true freedom evidently came with Greece, with the Greeks. The real sense of freedom, the real desire for freedom, and the real ability to enjoy freedom. And as you know, France had its day for finding freedom. The United States had its day. England had its Magna Carta. But nowhere have any people been able to maintain their freedom for any great length of time. Freedom never stays with any people. A few centuries seems to be about the limit that people can hold on to a free system of government, a government that guarantees freedom and equality and justice. Eventually, nations lose their freedom, even either to a political dictatorship or a religious dictatorship. One or the other always swallows up men's freedom. And unless there be some spiritual experience in the near future, that same condition is going to continue. Country after country will lose its freedom, including this one. In fact, the day isn't far off when this one will lose its freedom. It's due in less than 20 years. And then, of course, we'll begin a struggle again to get free. And in a century or two or three, freedom will come again. No country is ever going to make the demonstration of freedom through any human means. It cannot be done. There are two very good reasons why freedom cannot be maintained in any country. The first and probably most important is mental inertia. People just do not care about the subject of freedom while they've got it, as long as their human needs are being met. Let them earn enough to get by and keep them reasonably occupied with baseball, football, wrestling, television, radio, or some other external amusements, and you own them body and soul. You can do anything you want with them, manipulate them politically or religiously. And they have no complaints about it. They're perfectly happy. Of course, they wouldn't be if you interfered with that automobile outing or that radio or television or movies or sports, then you'd have a revolution. But as long as you don't touch those things, you can own the masses, body and soul. Do with them as you wish. Don't say you don't believe it, because you were told here yesterday by a man who hopes to be president that one of the biggest criminals in the country is bigger than the law and can't be reached by the law, and he controls things. And the same man that said that didn't have the courage to tell you that you have the same condition here, because that's his political ally. And therefore you fall asleep. You pay no attention to the fact that your liberties are menaced, that your freedom, that your economic well-being is menaced because nobody's interfering with your pleasure at the moment, and nobody's interfering with your profit at the moment. So you let these things go by. And it isn't only you who are sitting here. This is you all over the world. And this is what goes on until the population wakes up and it's too late. Now, in one guise or another, this has always happened. And this is happening here. Whether or not these things will be changed in the next 10 or 20 years is something that must still be seen. But for our purpose, the fact is that the entire world is threatened. Threatened not only from Russia, threatened not only from church, threatened not only from labor bosses, but threatened most of all by ourselves and our own unwillingness to think. It is so easy to read a picture magazine because no one has to think when they're reading that. It has been published many times that between 5 and 6% of the public, of the newspaper reading public, only between 5 and 6% read the editorial page, on which the real news of the world is published. Of course, you can read the murders, the divorces, and the rapes on the front page, and you can read the advertising on all the other pages, but you can only read the news as it affects your life on the editorial page. But only 5 to 6% of the newspaper readers of the United States read that page. That's what I mean by mental inertia. Now, I'm only using this as an example to come to the subject of spiritual freedom. You as an individual are under every physical, mental, and material law of this world until you come into some form of metaphysical teaching. It makes no difference in the beginning which, because under any one of them, you do begin at once to get free of some of the physical and mental limitations. There's enough truth in any of them, actually, to start a person on the way toward their freedom from physical limitation, mental limitation, and financial limitation. In all of these movements, and all of them are on the decrease, the reason is the same. People complain that they do not make their demonstrations. 9/10 of the responsibility is their own. They won't work with the material they're given. They won't put the principles they're taught to work. they still wish to take the attitude of, well, God will do it. Well, I can trust God to do it. Well, God is omnipotent. Well, God is all power. Oh, there's no other power but God. And relying on those things, they lose their demonstration. Now we come to this message of the infinite way, and I have no hesitation in saying to you that the principles of life have been revealed to us in this message, and that with the understanding and practice of them, we can free ourselves of, if not all, nearly all, of the limitations of this world. The only reason we can't free ourselves from all of them is that our intensity does not reach that degree. But certainly we can be free of 70 and 80 and 90% of the discords of this world if we would work with the principles which have been given to us in the message. Now, every time, right from the beginning of the work, that I have mentioned these things, I've had letters from students saying, oh, I thought that there was no other power but God, and so we didn't have to do anything. There isn't any other power but God. But that isn't saving the world from sin, disease, death, lack, and limitation, wars, and still more wars. Because that allness of God, that spiritual reality, has no relationship to the human world until each of us as an individual works ourselves up and out of humanhood to where, too, we can say that in some measure at least, I have overcome this world. It's an individual demonstration. We know that practitioners and teachers, and who are practitioners and teachers? Just those who have worked with the principles a little more than the rest of the world. They can free the young student. They can bring healing, supply, happiness, joy to some extent. But they can't keep it forever. Nor can they bring it about to the degree that each individual would like, because there just doesn't exist that much time for a practitioner or teacher to devote to any one student. I know. Those who do break through mental inertia to the extent that they learn and practice these principles, attain thereby a certain measure of spiritual consciousness, and can do some healing work. And of course the students can benefit from that. But you know, it has been said that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, but he died anyhow. Jesus healed multitudes of sickness. If you could watch their histories, they all probably became sick sometime again and even died. In other words, no one can make a permanent demonstration for anyone but himself or herself. Every bit of help that you get from a practitioner or a teacher is really to bear witness to what this principle can do. But if it were possible for practitioners or teachers to save everyone from the sufferings of this world, then all that the rich people would have to do would be to hire us. Wouldn't that be sweet? All the nice rich people give us a good income to live on just to keep them from sin, disease, and death, and accidents and limitation. You don't believe it could be done, do you? You don't believe that there is that much money in the world that would enable you to hire somebody else to keep you spiritually and physically, mentally, and morally, and financially free. You know better than that. You know it couldn't be done. If it could be, The practitioners would have all been snapped up long ago by the big corporations. They might even be on the government payroll to keep the government in power. The spiritual life is an individual life, and it is for this reason that the spiritual life is one of individuality. And that is why it can only thrive among a free people and a capitalistic people, because you cannot have a communal spiritual life. You cannot have a communal spiritual source to reach into, to share. Each one demonstrates in accord with their own ability to break through. Remember, there's only one barrier. Remember that there's only one barrier to a perfect spiritual life, and that's mental inertia. That's all. There's no other reason under the sun for students of metaphysics to go on year in and year out under evil conditions of this world. Nothing but mental inertia. They will not or cannot break through and sit down and consciously, first of all, learn the correct letter of truth, and then secondly, put it into practice. Now, the great miracle is this, and this is a miracle, that whereas there is no use for this world, for you or anyone else in this world, to sit around waiting to be one of the favored ones to have a spiritual experience, because lightning in that direction doesn't strike very often in a whole generation. There's no use sitting around waiting for it to happen, because in the vast majority of cases it isn't going to happen. But the miracle is that it can happen to any individual who can break through mental inertia to the extent that will enable them not to read books of truth, but to study them, to find out what the principles are, and then begin to apply them in their lives, facing the specific problems that arise. And through this practice, the spiritual centers of an individual are finally opened, and usually quickly, if they work faithfully with principles. Now, just as we have learned that it isn't enough just to go to church and let the minister pray for us, that doesn't get us our salvation, so we eventually learn that you cannot even hire practitioners and teachers to bring about your own salvation. So we learn that it becomes a matter of individual experience to put into practice these principles. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And as these principles are put into operation with the specific problems that arise, our own soul centers are opened. Now let me show you exactly how this works. I said to you before that even those who do have some spiritual light may lose it through not knowing the correct letter of truth. And here's what I mean. God, being omnipotence, God is the only power there is. As against this truth, we have in human experience material power and mental power, material force and mental force. These material powers result in disease and eventually death. Mental powers more likely result in sin, because our false appetites, our sinful thoughts, our evil suggestions have their rise not in our bodies, but in our mind. And so it is through the mind that we admit sin into our experience, and through the mind we also admit disease, which appears, though, as material force and material power. Now, the ordinary human life has no protection against mental force or material force, and therefore fights fire with fire, fights material force with more material force. They fought bows and arrows with javelins, and they fought javelins with pistols, and they fought those with guns and rifles, and they fought those eventually with cannon, and they fought those then with atomic bombs. And so it is that some years ago someone made a great discovery and used a drop of penicillin to overcome a lot of infection, and then gradually they had to double the dose of penicillin, and now they have to 10,000 times quadruple it to do the same thing that originally was done with that drop. In other words, we are always using a greater force to overcome a lesser force, and then must come a still greater force, and then a still greater force. So it is with mental powers. Before mental powers were known, people were victims without knowing what they were victims of. Then when Mesmer discovered mesmerism or hypnotism, some people at least began to know that they were suffering from the activity of other people's thoughts. As metaphysics began its event in the middle of the 19th century, the power of both good thought and evil thought was discovered, so that those who used the good thought could do healing work. Those who used bad thought could bring about evil influences and events. So that from that time to this, we do know that on the human plane, you can, by thinking good thoughts, produce good results. By thinking evil thoughts, you can produce evil results. We know that. The world itself doesn't quite realize to what extent that is a fact, nor does it realize how they can be mentally manipulated by a small group of individuals who do know the power of the mind. Now, well, you saw an example of that a couple of years ago when they performed those first experiments with subliminal perception and proved that they could make you get up out of your seat in a movie theater and go downstairs and buy popcorn and Coca-Cola even if you didn't want it. Of course, you didn't know that you were being compelled to do it by somebody sitting upstairs, directing you. So, more and more, however, it is known to those who read that there is such a thing as mental power, that there is such a thing as good thoughts being healing in their nature and evil thoughts being destructive in their nature, producing ills. Now, throughout this entire experience, on the mental level, you are finding what formerly was known about the material level. A stronger power overcomes a weaker power. A little more material strength overcomes a less material strength. A stronger prize fighter defeats a weaker prize fighter. We all know this on the material plane. Now we're beginning to know it on the mental plane, that those who have the strongest power of mental concentration can do good if good is their particular nature, and they can do evil if evil is their particular nature. And so again, we have two powers warring with each other on the material level and on the mental level. Ah, yes. But now we come to the revelation, as we have it in this message and as we have been proving it, that in the world of God there are not two powers, there are not any powers, that material force isn't a power and mental force isn't a power, because when the spiritual contact is made, there are no longer laws of either matter or mind. They both disappear. That is proven in the healing of physical disease and mental disease. That the moment you introduce that new dimension, spirit, you have nullified material force and spirit and mental force. Now, the first step for the person on the metaphysical path, and remember, you do not have to concern yourself at this moment whether you're spiritual or not, or whether you've been touched by the Spirit of God, or whether you've had a spiritual experience. You don't have to concern yourself with that. All you have to concern yourself with is, what is the truth with which I am to work? And that truth is that there are not good powers and bad powers, either of a material nature or mental nature. There is only one power, and that power is the power of the Spirit. And it's not an overcoming power. The power of God doesn't overcome evil. The power of God doesn't overcome sin or disease. The power of God isn't an overcoming power. It is a creative, maintaining, and sustaining power on its own level. But the moment it is realized, it dissolves that which we have been faced with in the form of material force or power, or mental force or power. The moment you know this, you stop the struggle against evil. You begin to come into the Christian dispensation in which you have been taught, put up thy sword, resist not evil. And then you learn why. Evil in and of itself is not power. It is power only to the mentality that still accepts two powers, a good power and an evil power. When you no longer accept good or evil powers and accept a God of infinite nature, omnipotence, omnipresence, right here where I am, not to be attained, not to be gained, not to be sought after, not to go around the world looking for the Holy Grail. For the kingdom of God is neither low here nor low there. It is where you are. The place whereon thou standest is holy ground. The kingdom of God is within you, and you don't have to go looking for it. Not even into books. The only purpose of books is to reveal this to you, but even after it's revealed it to you, it'll do nothing for you. Unless you take it and put it into conscious action. You might just as well read about how to play piano, and then try to get an engagement playing it. You can read about it, and it's good to read about it if you intend to put into practice what you read. Now, it is the same with the Bible. The Bible is probably the greatest, the Bible is the greatest book that has ever appeared in print anywhere at any time, and there never will be one that will be greater. But of what avail is it if you do not take the laws that are revealed in the Bible and put them into conscious action? What good is it to read that God is all power, and then the very next thing that pops up, begin to fear it? Now, The first and greatest truth that a metaphysician must learn is that God is, and because God is, nothing else is true except God and that which God created and that which God gave forth. All that God made is good. Anything that God did not make was not made. Well, if disease isn't good, then you must be assured God didn't make it. If God didn't make it, it has no existence. Oh, sure, we're suffering from it. Of course we are, because we were born into this double-mindedness of two powers, and consciously and unconsciously we accept two powers, and thereby we come under the law of two powers. Do you think that it's easy to overcome that which we for centuries have been accepting? You may say, oh, but my child has only been here 10 years. They aren't too much under that law. Nonsense. Your child has been born and reborn and born and reborn under this thing for centuries. There isn't a single one of us that had our beginning on what we call our birthday. That too would make mockery of a God. We have existed from time immemorial. We have coexisted with God, and we will live unto eternity. But in our human identity, we have been thrust into this world time after time, and always under these same laws of good and evil, of matter and of mind. Now, it isn't an easy thing to come to the place where you must acknowledge, in spite of all appearances to the contrary, that laws of matter and laws of mind are not power, for God is the only lawgiver, and God is spirit, therefore all law is spiritual. Now don't think for a moment that because this is said from the platform as truth, and it is truth, the most important truth ever revealed, don't think that that demonstrates it for you. It may, some degree of healing can take place right in this room because of the consciousness that is uttering this statement. But don't you rely on it too long, because you yourself have to bring yourself to that place in consciousness where you declare, judge not after appearances, judge righteous judgment. I know all the appearances of material law. I've seen bullets operate. I know all about how the bombs operate. And how disease operates too. Heaven knows I've had plenty of it. But spiritual truth reveals that material law isn't law and mental law isn't law, for God is the only lawgiver and God is spirit, and therefore the only law is spiritual. Now, to maintain that in your consciousness, actively and consciously, day by day by day by day, forgetting all the other writings, forgetting all the other statements of truth, just abiding in that one truth until it registers, until the inner click or realization comes, until it dawns in your consciousness, that is the truth. I know, as well as you know, that there are too many infinite way books. There should be one. One's enough. But in our humanhood, we just cannot stay with one book and take it sentence by sentence and principle by principle until we've demonstrated it. And so we have 25 books, so you can read the same thing over and make it do the same work as if you were working yourself. But one book is enough, just like one Bible is enough. One book of John is enough to save the world. If everyone would take the book of John sentence by sentence, principle by principle. Now, we then have the metaphysics of life and the mysticism. And the mysticism can come to you by divine grace, or you can bring it to yourself by the practice of the metaphysics of it. But in doing that, it must be the correct letter of truth. In other words, you can't declare God's allness today and then tomorrow wonder what wrong thoughts I'm having that's doing this to me, or wonder why mortal mind is doing this to me, or wonder if I'm being punished for some sin of omission or commission. There has to be a consistency as well as a persistency in holding to the fact that there is but one power. And if I have sinned, that isn't a power, because God didn't create the sin or the penalty for the sin, and therefore it has no existence in that one mind or consciousness which is God. God being the only law is a law of eternal forgiveness. And if you need to prove it to yourself, you read the New Testament and find that Jesus had no condemnation for the adulteress. Jesus had no condemnation for the thief taken in the act. Jesus had no condemnation for any form of sin. Always, neither do I condemn thee. Start all over again. So you begin to find for yourself that instead of holding yourself in condemnation to a power of punishment, you begin to abide under your realization that God is an eternal state of forgiveness. God is starting all over every second of every minute and every minute of every hour. Every second is a fresh one, and the past is dead. The future can't come. Now, the secret of healing is not in the mysticism, but in the metaphysics of the message, and the metaphysics of the message leads to the mysticism in which one finds complete spiritual freedom. Then there's no longer an overcoming through knowing the truth. There is no longer any process. There is only a state of divine being. Now, the mystics like Jesus, who knew this principle and could say to Pilate, "Thou couldst have no power over me unless it were given thee of God," who could say to a crippled man, "What did hinder you?" In other words, what power is there in that disease? Come on, get up. To a mystic of that nature, healings were inevitable, as well as complete freedom for himself and for all those within range of his consciousness. So for us, to attain proficiency in first understanding, knowing the correct letter of truth, then in its application to every phase of our human existence, until one by one these principles come alive in us, this then opens the mystical center, and after that we need not live by taking thought. You no longer have to take thought for your life, for your health, for your supply. You will find that what Paul taught was literally true. I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. There is a spiritual presence in me which goes before me to prepare the way. And it provides for us everything necessary to the complete fulfillment of our life's demonstration. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But it says where the Spirit of the Lord is. There must first be the Spirit of the Lord, not the statement. The statement, the quotation, will not do anything for us. It has to be the understanding of the statement and the demonstration of the statement. I have told previous classes this experience. I was sitting in a Christian Science church one Wednesday evening, listening to a very uninteresting reader, and unable to concentrate on the lesson, and my mind kept wandering up to the wall. And eventually it focused itself on that statement, Divine love always has met and always will meet every human need. And you know, I looked at that and looked at it, and finally the thought came to me, Miss Eddie, how could you say that? Here I am looking around this church, I know everybody in it, and all their troubles, and divine love doesn't seem to be doing a thing about most of them. And I kept looking and wondering, why did she say it? Why did she write it? Why did she want that on every church wall? And then all of a sudden, it flashed into my consciousness that that statement was true. Absolutely true. Divine love always has met and always will meet every human need. But divine love isn't out there doing it to me. Divine love is something I have to express. And when I express divine love, it meets my every human need. There is no divine love sitting on a cloud. There is no divine love floating around in this air. The only divine love there is in this room is the divine love which we permit to flow out from us. And divine love doesn't mean human love or emotion or sensuality. Divine love means a spiritual love, which means forgiveness, patience, cooperation, gentleness, charitableness. All of these things are embraced in divine love, and as we express them, they meet our every human need. If you do not express them, they are unexpressed, and they are not meeting our human need. Now, that experience of mine that night is an illustration of what I'm saying to you in this entire lesson, that that truth up there did nothing for us. It was first the understanding and then the putting into practice, and then it operated. Not only for me, it'll operate for all those who will first grasp it, understand it, practice it. So it is with every truth, every principle in our writings. The principle itself will do nothing for you any more than the principle of electricity will do anything for anyone except the fellow who hooks it up. All of the principles of electricity, radio, television, automobile, airplane, they've been in existence since before Abraham was. But they didn't light the world. Oh no, not until somebody came along and dug them out of consciousness and put them into operation. And so every truth, every law, every power exists now in your individual consciousness. Why in your individual consciousness? Because the infinite divine consciousness is your individual consciousness. Not this human mind that you think with, but behind that, deeper than that. Therefore, as you learn to turn within to that infinite source, you also can draw out music, art, literature, mechanics, whatever it is that your particular nature needs for fulfillment. We don't all draw the same thing out because God is infinite. Therefore, our natures are infinite. And for some of us, we could not be fulfilled except through music or art or literature or truth. And others could not be fulfilled except through benevolences or invention or science, building. Each one has something that fulfills their own nature. And by the ability to turn within to that kingdom within your own consciousness, you draw forth from it that which is your fulfillment. Now we know, of course, that 99% of the world is working for a living and not at the thing which is their fulfillment, something that they merely tolerate. The reason is they started out young, got into the wrong thing, got married, had to support a family, and had no time then to go after the thing that would have fulfilled them. So they have to stick with that with which they're stuck. With this understanding, it is never too late, because we can all turn within, we can all be patient until we reach that infinite source within ourselves and begin to draw forth our fulfillment, and then with patience we will find that we're moved one step at a time to that which is to be our life. Unfortunately, for most of those who have come into metaphysics, they expect all of this the easy way, and it can't happen that way. And they're afraid of the interval in between, when they may seem to be a failure to the world, when they may not seem to be bringing forth fruitage, and they expect just to be led from where they are to their heavenly estate without the experiences that often do come when we have to give up the ways we trod yesterday for the ways of tomorrow. Often there are bleak intervals in between. With wisdom, we learn not to be afraid of failure. With wisdom, we learn not to be afraid of lack or limitation. With wisdom, we learn to be patient with our transitional experiences until we do come into the fulfillment. Be assured of this. Our life's experience is the outpicturing of our own state of consciousness. Whatever limitations we are experiencing are the limitations of our own state of consciousness, and they're going to continue until our state of consciousness develops and deepens and becomes enriched, and then the outer experience follows that pattern. Sometimes we have to be patient during the transitional experience. Now, this I give you, that there are two parts to the message of the infinite way. There is the mystical aspect of the message, there is the metaphysical aspect of the message. Sometimes in your reading of the mystical aspect, it may have the effect of opening you spiritually and lifting you into a spiritual experience, but do not let this mislead you. Don't let it deprive you of the opportunity of studying and practicing the correct letter, so that you never fall into the trap of believing that you have a God that is destroying evil, or that is healing disease, or that is bringing you wealth. Don't do it. You must abide in the consciousness of God as Spirit, governing eternally and immortally and harmoniously, and let the evils or the negatives fall away from your experience without battle, without strife. Remember that even some of the Hebrew mystics knew this. They have only the arm of flesh. We have the Lord God Almighty, and they rested in His Word. And Jesus, resist not evil. Put up thy sword. Thou couldst have no power over me unless it came from the Father in heaven. And as you abide in that, the mystical experience will deepen and it will enrich your consciousness. But never forget that basic truth. God is not an overcomer. I have overcome the world, yes. I have overcome the world by learning and practicing this principle until that day came when Christ took over. And in that moment we hear, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. After that, we have nothing ever to fear except those worldly temptations that would cause us to give in to two powers or to succumb to negative powers. Never can we fail in our alertness or we will fail in our demonstration. Peter failed, Thomas failed, Judas failed. All the disciples failed because they were not alert and awake to that which they had been taught, and they succumbed. Thomas to his doubts, Peter to self-preservation as the first law of nature, Judas probably to ambition. You see, even after you have the light, the world wants to tempt you. Oh, yes, Jesus was already engaged in his ministry when he faced the three greatest temptations of his life. The temptation to turn stones into bread. The temptation to seek fame. Oh, yes, even after he was in the ministry, these temptations came to him. And so many in the spiritual ministry have found that they had a temptation of temporary lack and then resorted to human means to meet it, or they succumbed to the temptation of abundance and began to use their abundance in terms of material satisfactions and pleasures and delights. And so temptations come not only to those who have not been illumined, but to those who have been illumined, and it takes a great deal of alertness to hold to that light and never succumb to the material sense of good. Yes, too many metaphysicians have the belief that when they begin to experience a material sense of good, that indicates that they're being more spiritual and enjoying more of God, not knowing that sometimes that very material good is to be their destruction. No, the spiritual path calls for alertness, but there can be no alertness if we do not know the principles which bring about the experiences and upon which the spiritual life is based. Now, we've taken only one tonight, and the reason we've taken only one is that it is the most important one. This one, if you remember it, will prevent you from praying to God for something. This one will prevent your expecting something from God. This one will prevent you from turning to God to have some evil overcome. This is the major principle. This is the one that, if you follow it, can save you many, many headaches. I had a great joy this week in receiving a paper sent out by a bishop of the Episcopal Church on prayer, in which he asked those who receive this paper whether they are the ones who expect things, or whether they can trust their God. And he quoted us and said that our message says that we are not those who get or receive, but we are those through whom God pours forth his bounties unto this world. And so was teaching them that very point, without saying it outright. Don't go to God for your blessings. Let blessings pour out through you. You don't receive, you give. You are the instrument through which God's grace flows. If Jesus is the way shower, then one of the ways he showed us was how to feed 5,000 and have 12 baskets full left over, even without storehouses and barns. Merely by acknowledging that we already have God's grace, and that all we have to do is to begin with the 1 or 2 loaves and 1 or 2 fishes and start pouring them out. And they'll multiply themselves. And it was a source of great gratification a few years ago to hear Bishop Sheehan, the Catholic bishop, on the air tell his audience, as a closing remark, never pray to God for any material thing, for God knows only spiritual good. And when you pray, pray for spiritual good. Do you see what I mean? If you do not know these principles, you cannot even pray aright. And the greatest of them all is, God is. And therefore, that which you have been fearing is not a power. And as you maintain that truth in your consciousness, it loses its sense of power and disappears. Thank you, until tomorrow night. Between now and then, please remember this. Don't use truth for any purpose whatsoever. Just abide in the realization that God is, and let that truth do its own work. God is. Thank you.